household assets, all of it is here across your generation. Very good question, thank you for that. Generation X, born from 1979 to 1965. Generation X, where's Generation X again? Make some noise. You guys were supposed to be the end all. You guys were supposed to burn it down, and you didn't. You remember Generation X, you were Generation Cool, right? Generation Kiss It, Generation Stick It Where the Sun Doesn't Shine, Generation whatever, right? Generation I want my MTV. You got your MTV. What did you do with it? You remember your anthem? I want to be a corporate idiot. Look at you now. Look at you now. What happened, Generation X? What happened? You were supposed to burn it. We could have had it all with your generation. What happened? I need an answer. Somebody tell me. What happened? What happened? You're taking your time? Or you have families to raise? Or you have a mortgage? Oh, rub it in. You have a mortgage, Mr. Fancy Homeowner. Right? You got bills to pay. And that's what we're seeing right now, right? Mortgages and midlife for Generation X. The oldest Generation X right now is 57 years old, and the youngest Generation X is about 43. This is also a generation that has seen a lot of history run through their generation. From the AIDS rights to gay rights, a lot of movements going on with Generation X. This is also a generation that saw a huge technological revolution. You guys went from Walkmans to CDs, you went from big cell phone things to pagers and beepers. You got your MTV, all right? You got your rock and roll, and you got to sit at home and eat cereal for dinner because your parents weren't coming home till late, you know? Go home and shut the door and don't open it for anybody until I get home, right? That was Generation X. So again, AIDS and gay rights. You saw the fall of the Berlin Wall. You saw the Challenger explosion. You saw Operation Desert Storm, the first time we went over to Iraq and Afghanistan in the Middle East. You saw the beating of Rodney King, right? Y2K, we can't forget that. Y2K, the world's gonna end. Y2K, it's over. Just add a one. Just add a one. Okay? 9/11, 2001, very impactful on your generation. And then, of course, you made history because it was the bulk of your generation that put our very first black president into the United States of America, President Barack Obama. But again, going back to this generation, Generation X, you're very independent. Generation X is very independent. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, so divorce is running rampant, as someone said, maybe in your generation, but you also saw it in maybe your parents. You're the first generation to experience it amongst your parents in a more prevalent manner that perhaps the baby boomers didn't experience. So because of all that, and so someone mentioned that you're also maybe a blend of millennials and boomers, because you are that seamless generation. So we see your communication style is still very effective. You can do face-to-face, you can do email, you can do phone. You're very adaptive because you've went through all of these technological revolutions. You love technology, you love learning, right? Oh my gosh, all good things, Generation X, right? But here's the kicker. Unlike the generation before you, you don't live to work. You work to live, right? It's a very key difference. You want to do your time, 5 o'clock hits, you're out the door. You're not staying until 5:30. There's no meetings at 5:45, right? There's no phone calls. My phone is off. So they understand the priority of work-life balance. The very first generation to introduce work-life balance into the workforce. Any questions so far? Doing all right? Am I hitting all the marks? Yes, Generation X? All right, so for you, America's bad boy, aka Robert Downey Jr., 48-year-old Robert Downey Jr., 58-year-old Robert Downey Jr., 46-year-old America's sweetheart, Cameron Diaz. So Generation X, you're doing okay. You really are. Where's my Generation X again? I love it because they're the loudest. Generation X, you're doing all right. According to AARP, most of your generation, over half of your generation actually, has reached management positions. Oh, you're laughing at AARP? Yes? It's time. It's time. Over half your generation has reached management positions or upper-level management positions. Most of your workforce, for those surveyed anyway, you're hitting about $70K in salary. Hey, that's pretty good, right? No? I saw some shaking heads. Where was that? Most of your generation is still worried about retirement, though. You're very attuned to the fact that there may not be a lot of Social Security left for you A lot of your 401ks took a huge hit in 2008, right? So you're still playing a little bit of catch up, and that's stressing you out a little bit. But overall, most of your generation, almost 90% of you, report that you're in great health. You're doing okay. Your stress levels are fine. And then, of course, the last graph here, wanting to make sure that you're spending your time and your money on things that matter to you. Your family, going out before COVID, going to the movies, going to places to eat, spending time with your kids. That's Generation X. My millennials. Thank you. We're getting better. Millennials born anywhere from 1996 to 1980, which means most of you are no longer kids, right? And I put SUVs to WTF, so what the fill in the blanks, because it seems like that's what we're always saying these days. This is a generation that is constantly saying WTF, what is going on? I'm constantly stressed, a lot of anxiety, okay? Because we have a lot of debt. We have a lot of debt, but we're also one of the most educated generations that are out there. They told us, okay, 9/11 happened, oh, don't worry. It's a once-in-a-lifetime tragedy, right? The economy will recover. Then 2008 happened, and they said, don't worry. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. The economy will recover. And then COVID happened, and they said, don't worry. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You'll recover. And by the way, half of this generation, for half of their life, America has been at war. Can you believe that? 20 years, since 2001, half of this generation, half of their life, America's been at war. So we really are the new tree hugger generation, if you think about it, right? And then we're dealing with climate change on the cusp. All this global warming, all this talk about climate change and the weather in Florida not existing in 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is now. So we're just constantly stressed, constantly doing. And so when you talk about millennials, and I hear this word a lot, entitlement, or we're lazy, keep in mind, we're the first generation, half of our generation, again, was born into the recession. Me personally, graduated, 2009, 2010, just a year or two after the recession, there were no jobs for recent college grads during those years. So when you graduate into a recession, all studies, all statistics point to your generation is constantly trying to play catch up. And so when you think about millennials, you really need to understand that this is a generation trying to catch up. And so that's why we're so adamant that you advertise your wages. That's why we're so adamant on getting those promotions. That's why we're so adamant about getting our raises. Because we're trying to catch up. We're trying to catch up. We're the first generation that will not meet or exceed our parents' level of wealth. And that's mostly due to the student debt crisis that we're taking now, the housing crisis that's going on now. We're just constantly in debt. Cost of inflation, everything's going up. And despite all that, we somehow, I don't know how, somehow we still remain resilient. We still hope for a better future. We're still pretty optimistic. Again, we're one of the most educated generations, but also one of the most in debt. We also prioritize work-life balance, mental health. These are things that are very important to us as well. And if you're hoping to attract or retain this generation, those are one of the key things that you should be paying attention to. Prioritizing social responsibility and ethics, I'm going to get to a little bit later when we talk about developing and retaining. But I just want you to remember that this is a generation that's trying to catch up. And so celebrity representatives for us would be 42-year-old Kevin Hart and 28-year-old Ariana Grande. Did anyone go to school? Did anyone go to college in the 80s? Anybody? Anybody want to admit it? Sir in the back, do you remember, how much did you pay for a year of tuition in the 80s? I'm sorry? A couple thousand a year, 1,500, 1,800? Okay? Yeah, that's what college cost. Tuition, not room and board, just tuition, was about $1,500 to $1,800 in 1980. You know what the college cost of tuition is now in 2020? Almost $10,000. That's a 1,000% increase in the cost of college tuition. So when we talk about the college debt crisis, yes, sir? yeah, $10,000. So Daytona State College would like to disclaimer that we're nowhere near that. So thank you for that. Might be a very viable choice. I was actually sitting at a table with Dante and Max earlier, and they were telling me about some great programs that are going on at Daytona State College. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get to developing and retaining the generations. But guys, that's a 1,000% increase over just 30 years. If you have a great year in the stock market, do you know what your return is? And a great year in the stock market, 9 to 10%. 10% over 30 years, 300% return. College tuition, 1,000% return. I'm in the wrong business, right? Oh my God. Okay, let's move on to Gen Z. Gen Z born anywhere from 2012 to, 1997? Which means the oldest Gen Z right now is 25 years old, and the youngest Gen Z is 10. A lot of your kids, maybe, perhaps, of this generation. Wi-Fi and willpower, this is what defines Generation Z. They don't call it the internet, they call it Wi-Fi, right? And this is a generation that is constantly tapped in, and that's where the title of this presentation comes from. This is a generation heavily involved in our politics, heavily involved in news. This is a generation that's taking charge of all the riots and the protests. When they are together, this generation is a force to be reckoned with, okay? This is the generation, now keep in mind, this generation has dealt with gun violence after gun violence after gun violence, school shooting after school shooting after school shooting. They are tired. This generation is tired. They're sick of it. And they're gonna let you know that they're sick of it, right? They're very vocal. They're very out there in your face, bold when they're together. When they're individual, it's a whole different experience. This is the generation that's dealt with police brutality. We continue to see that. White police officers, black civilians, whatever the case is. And then discrimination is a constant theme throughout this generation. That's mostly because this generation, it will be the most diverse generation that we have. Over 49% of them will be non-Caucasian. Over 49% of Gen Z will be non-Caucasian. So diversity is incredibly important to them. Incredibly important. I believe on your survey somewhere, number 3 or number 4, I was so happy to see, asks you that question about diversity. Is your company doing something about diversity and inclusion? Is that important to you in your hiring practices? Are you getting rid of non-biases in your hiring practices? This is the generation that's going to be on the lookout for that. So very important to take note of that. And again, despite all of that, despite all of the negativity that's happening with their generation, they are still determined, they still want a better work-life balance. They're prioritizing mental health. If you remember the athletes, who was the Olympic athlete? Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, always prioritizing mental health, not taking interviews because you guys are gonna come at me, I'm gonna get upset, and then I won't perform. We've never seen that before, right? When does an athlete refuse interviews? Very rarely does it happen, but this is happening more and more in this generation. They're taking their mental health very seriously. And also, they're also drowning in the cost of living. Rent keeps going up, mortgages keep going up, cost of everything, healthcare, food, education. Oh, there she is, 24-year-old Naomi Osaka, and 19-year-old Billie Eilish, YouTuber turned famous music artist. She actually just scored the most recent soundtrack to the Bond film, the new James Bond film. So in a nutshell, that's it. Those are all the generations in a nutshell. Gen Z, you'll notice more often than not, is not just doing one job, they're doing 2 jobs, 3 jobs, a lot of part-time work, a lot of gig work, because they need to make ends meet. And so a lot of them, when you're asking them to do full-time employment, they'll say, give me a flexible schedule. Something to remember about Gen Z.
Did I get the job?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because you're a baby boomer, and I don't know when it is.
Well, Melanie, I am overqualified for this job.
I don't know where you got this. We don't do paper applications.
I mean, I don't do the internet.
Okay, that is the 3rd time you have said that this interview, and it also says so on this homemade job application.
There you go, Chip.
I don't know what this is for.
Don't you need a trophy anytime you... anything?
Oh, it's on. How'd you get here? Horse?
No, I drove my car. I own it. payments. How'd you get here?
I took an Uber.
Do not know what that is. But you're a baby.
Yeah, because I'm not a monster. Your generation is afraid of black people.
Your generation thinks you are black people.
Oh, word. Look at who you guys voted for.
Yeah, that's right. I voted.
Touche.
This is the only way you'll ever own a house.
Learning how to text is the only way you'll ever communicate with your son. So,
Alright guys, who took my Sheryl Crow album?
Gen X. You know what? You're hired.
I quit.
Dad!
You didn't see that coming, did you?